Okay. Well, we'll revisit this. Let's get into it. Game number 1, Golden Guardians and Perplexed. I gotta have a word with Cyril here.
All right, so we see both of those teams starting up that first pull. Of course, no difference here. All of the teams always pulling the whole hallway here. We see the Ashen Hallow being popped by JB. Not sure if Ryzen used his as well.
Ryzen
Sometimes
did, yeah.
you see different kinds of... Okay, so both of the teams did commit the Ashen Hallow for this initial pull.
Yeah, it's less sometimes that you really want it for a certain pull, although I think it does get a lot of value both in healing and in damage on this pull. And it's also just you want to get that thing on cooldown, right? You want to have that cooldown recovering while you're taking that Angel Flight, and you want to have it available again 4.5 minutes into the dungeon, and so that you can get as many uses as possible. So you really need to have a very good reason if you're going to do any sort of substantially sized pull, and you're not going to press Ashen Hallow if it's off cooldown, right? You need to have like a specific boss in the near future or a specific pull that you really need it for that's going to justify losing out on that cast over the course of the dungeon. And certainly this didn't meet that threshold. They don't need it for this first boss badly enough. In fact, this first boss sometimes doesn't cooperate with your Ashen Hallow because it lasts for 30 seconds and the boss moves all over the room and potentially out of your Hallow. As they're now getting into the second pull of the dungeon here, and you can see the cage is coming out on that Forsworn Mender from both teams. They will still get to 20% trash from the other mobs here, and they'll be able to spawn that Pride. And the Mender is actually the one that creates those weapons, that weapon buff on itself, which you can then either spell seal or purge or whatever, and it'll drop the weapon on the ground. You can pick it up and get a lot of extra damage out of it as well, and that can be used both on the Pride and on the boss for a little bit of extra value. So that's why you'll see teams usually caging that Mender and saving it for during the Pride or during the boss.
Yeah, it's a nice little trick here, as both Divine Field and, of course, the healer can also pick it up as well for Perplexed. Golden Guardians a little bit slower on this trash pull. Also, the first trash pull was being dealt with a little bit slower for Golden Guardians. So Perplexed seem to be having a bit more focus damage. I think that's the difference I've seen so far in those two Spires pulls. Whenever there was a difference in speed, even though they are playing the same comp and the same offensive cooldowns are being committed to that pull, it always seemed like whichever team had more focus damage on those higher HP mobs, like the Vanguard and the Goliath, was usually a team that just dealt with the pack faster. So Perplexed seem to be having just a little bit more focused target damage, as they're now pulling the boss, basically just pulling the Pride into the boss and just cleaving it down a little. Golden Guardians doing the same thing, and both of the teams committing that Bloodlust, so they won't have the Bloodlust for that incredibly difficult pull after the 40% Pride, where we've seen lots of teams wipe to.
Yeah, that's a pull that caused so many teams so many problems in previous weeks of the MDI. This time around, though, now with that Holy Paladin, it's a pull for which they have Ashen Hallow. And so that provides the extra damage and the healing that you need to get through it without Bloodlust. And I think that's the idea behind firing off that first Ashen Hallow in the dungeon. Then you have Bloodlust here for this boss, and then you have Ashen Hallow for that really difficult trash pull on the right-hand side. As Perplexed, I mean, look at the speed with which Perplexed is moving through the dungeon here. They're already on this 6th Larian pull with the Darkseeker. Really great positioning here as well that's going to let them group everything up. This is tricky with Storming active, fighting in such a narrow area with those tornadoes, zoning them out as much as it is. But you can see they've done a really good job. Divine is under a lot of attack, but it looks like he's going to be okay there, hanging out at 7% health. And those Darkseeker casts from the Dark Praetor are really hurting him, but they are going to be okay. This is really sketchy.
Yeah, these Stealth Claws and the Dark Praetor are doing a huge amount of damage to Divine Field, but it was so nice to see how fast they were gathering up this pull. So after the boss died, Ryzen immediately buffed Divine Field with Bop, so he can just jump through and pick up those Stealth Claws, because they're of course not visible, they're in stealth. So once you know where they are positioned, you can jump in them and pull, but if you don't actually hit them before they hit you, then you get stunned. So that's why the Bop was being used by Ryzen here immediately to just give Divine Field the tools to pull these mobs incredibly quickly. So well done by Perplexed, as the Golden Guardians are now also done with that trash. But yeah, just doing everything just slightly slower compared to Perplexed.
Yeah, so Perplexed is starting off this very big pull now. They have the Ashen Hallow down. They knocked out the Inspiring mob to land a couple kicks, and now it's come back in, and they are going to be able to AoE everything down, and hopefully either finish off the Inspiring mob. Yeah, they will be able to finish off the Inspiring mob before they get those next fist casts that they'll need to interrupt. Look at how much damage they've been able to deploy here. Look at the damage that Ryzen's been putting out with that Ashen Hallow on this pull here. He's second place, just behind a Shine on the Hunter. in this pull. I mean, everybody in the entire group is really just cranking the meters right now. And that's going to be their 40% pride spawned. They'll be finishing it off with the residual damage that's left over here. Picking up that spear as well. Looks like it's going to be Divine who's going to be picking up that spear for later. Needs to dodge the beam as well. But Golden Guardians also making something happen over here. Looks like a slightly different set of enemies has been pulled, because I see a Dark Praetor that they're not in combat with. And I think the Perplexed pulled everything in this area. Maybe I'm wrong, though. Maybe we're going to see the same count. Yeah, we are. So I'm wrong. Both teams skipped that very first pull on this platform. You can just walk around to the side, and we saw both of them do that, actually. I remember now. So that makes the pull a little bit more feasible. I think we've seen sometimes teams have pulled that one in back when they were using Bloodlust on this platform, but without it, it turns out to be just a little bit too much.
Yeah, definitely didn't want to take any risk and pulling 2 Praetors into this pack. It's also a little bit of an issue because they always jump out, which can cause just lots of time loss as well. Not just inefficiency when it comes to like damage on the tank and so on, but just a time loss because you cannot cleave it down evenly with the rest of the pack. Perplex now gathering up another huge pull though with an inspired mob here, but they have the spear, so they just throwing down the spear. They need to finish off that inspired mob though, otherwise they're not going to be able to interrupt the Goliath after it comes out. So interesting to see that they're still pulling this off, and there we go, the inspired mob is dead, so they can finish off the Goliath here and the Inquisitor while also getting interrupts off. But yeah, just a big pull into big pull by Perplexed and Golden Guardians as well, just doing the same thing on their side.
Yeah, one thing to note about the way these spears function is that they will retroactively stun, right? If you throw it down and there are some mobs that are outside of it and then you knock them in or they run in, they will end up getting stunned as well. And so both teams actually used that. They threw the spear before everything was fully grouped just to give them that little bit of breathing room, and then they'd bring in whatever else needed to come. Golden Guardians, though, looks like their strategy is going to be a little bit slower on this side because they still have they use that spear, but they didn't have that entire Ether Diver patrol involved. Perhaps that was just due to its patrol position. It was maybe on the far side, and so they couldn't easily grab it. But that's going to add quite a bit of extra time to their dungeon here, as those aren't going to be taking that bonus damage from the spear being down. And of course, Fired Up's combustion did not hit all of them as effectively. Meanwhile, Perplexed are already on to this pull before Ventinac's second boss here. They've crowd-controlled 2 of the mobs up at the top of the stairs, and they'll be fighting these 3, including the squad leader, which does that nasty AoE damage reduction aura, so they are going to focus it down. And then they'll have those 2 crowd-controlled mobs, which they can actually pull onto that boss. And it's easy enough to deal with them with the boss, because the boss has no other interrupts or anything else like that that needs to be handled on itself. And it actually gives them a little bit of damage bonus to be fighting that third target, getting those trick shots out from their hunter. So it's a nice little efficiency optimization on a pull that's very hard to do. If you tried to fight all 5 of these at once and then you were spawning the Pride on the first thing that died, you would be in quite a bit of trouble. And so they've come up with this really nice way of sequencing everything.
Yoda just... It looked like Yoda got carried up by the whirlwind and then he fell off right before he reached the platform. That's going to be a pretty decent time loss for Golden Guardians. Now he did manage to get carried up, but yeah, that was just another time loss for them, unfortunately. And yeah, this misposition of the patrol, of the Ether Diver patrol, really cost them quite a bit. Because not only did they not get the spear damage, they also had to CC the inspired Ether Diver, because obviously they didn't have a spear anymore, and then they had to finish it off after the rest of the pack. So yeah, very unfortunate with the patrol timing for Golden Guardians here, while Perplexed is already fighting Bentinex now after they dealt with that 60% pride. They're also cleaving down that trash, as you mentioned, so just very, very efficient, being able to just deal with some of the trash here at the same time as just dealing with the boss. Of course, the Inquisitor, if you have enough interrupts, not too big of a deal. Of course, if you don't interrupt, then it can be really deadly on this boss because of the bleed that this boss also casts on a ranged player. So if you get a Dark Clash from the Inquisitor plus a bleed, or one of those magic debuffs that it also casts, then it can be incredibly deadly. But no problem for Perplexed as they now finish off Ventinex.
Yeah, one nice thing about this composition against that boss as well is that you get that Holy Paladin, which brings Bop. And so if there is ever somebody who is under a lot of danger from the bleed, you can always just bop it off. I don't know if their bop is used for anything else in the near future. It's something that a lot of the bops that the Paladins do bring are committed to usually the start of a pull, right? You'll either bop the Hunter or the Demon Hunter, who will run around and grab threat on everything, and that will let them group everything up nice and easily without there being any casts or deaths to really worry about from doing that. So that's sometimes the bops are being saved for that. but I don't think that's how they're going to do any of the pulls in the future. So I think that they do have that bop available if needed for one of the bleeds here. You can actually see Fired Up under a lot of pressure on the side of Golden Guardians. It's going to be his Cauterize there as well that's being committed, and the bleed did quite a bit of damage to him, but he's going to be okay. Perplexed, making their way up now.
The dwarf and the dark iron dwarf racial would be working as well on the bleed, right? So we see the Shadow Priests and the Paladins have that available to them in case they have the bleed, which is on cooldown for both Shakib and Swag. So I assume both of them actually used it for that bleed. So that was nicely done using those racials to just make it a little bit easier on the healers.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's one of the powerful... If you're not using Shadow Melds to facilitate any skips, those Dwarf or Dark Iron Dwarf racials are so absurdly powerful. But look at this pull that Perplex is now doing here. This is their second Spear of the Dungeon, so they won't have any spears available for that triple Kyrian Angel pull right at the end of the dungeon. But they really need it to make this pull work, because this is a very, very scary set of enemies with those Hellions in there. They are going to be okay, though. Divine, at that 33% health, is just barely going to be able to survive there. Looks like he used his blood-spattered scale trinket, if I had to guess what that huge shield was on him. Wow.
Yeah, just incredibly well done, because this is a pull we've seen teams wipe to, and it's even more difficult this week because of that inspiring, right? So we've seen, for example, Perplex just to see that Warden off to the side, and now they're pulling it into the Pride. So they didn't want to deal with that Warden at all as they're pulling the rest of it. It looks like Golden Guardians is doing the same thing. So they pulled the Warden to the side, managed to get a CC on it, and now they're gathering up the rest of the trash. But you need a huge amount of damage to be able to pull this off. Oh! The fist is going through for Golden Guardians as the Goliath was not actually inside the spear AoE, but thankfully they did survive it, so they might be able to finish this off. But this is going to be incredibly dangerous for them as the mobs need to die quickly, otherwise they're going to be running out of interrupts.
Wow, I cannot believe they've survived that. That was so much damage to their entire group there. But JP is able to just barely keep everybody alive. Several members dropping to 10% or lower on the side of Golden Guardians. But they have recovered from this, and it's actually not going to cost them basically any time at all. That Goliath casting was really, really unfortunate. But they are going to be okay, as they now are going to do the exact same pull as Perplexed here with that Warden coming into the Pride, but they've just lost something on the order of 30 seconds over this dungeon. I think mostly just due to Perplexed executing the same pulls, but slightly faster, because there really has been no difference between these teams. Both teams are on a zero-death run, but something has to make up why these two teams have 2 minutes difference on their time trial times, and I think it might just be, Perplexed just moving a little bit faster through the whole dungeon.
Yeah, it really just seemed like different kinds of offensive cooldown usages, maybe a little bit more efficiency here and there with their focus target damage on the higher HP mobs. We also saw on one of the pulls the Praetor jumped out on the Golden Guardian side, meaning they had to put a lot more damage into the Praetor because he didn't manage to get all that cleave damage. So really just a bunch of smaller things here and there. Because Golden Guardians is playing really well, of course, with that zero-death run, right? This is incredibly clean by them. Just like slightly less efficient compared to Perplex, who is just having such a smooth and clean and very efficient run. Divine Field almost going down here, as this boss is actually one of the few bosses that does not clear debuffs once you finish off the boss. So you still have those orb debuffs, and you also have the targeted debuff from the boss once the boss dies. So the healer still needs to make sure that to keep everyone alive.
Yeah, it's one of the quirks of this dungeon is the experience of having 10 stacks after this boss dies and just falling over as your healer is now ignoring you. I think that it is incredible to Golden Guardians' credit here that they have kept this game so close against Perplexed's, #1 time trial time, and they are on pace to match that time. And one thing to remember about this dungeon is it is never over until those three angels go down, right? If there is an angel healing fiasco, or if there's just a death to them, that usually spells minutes worth of time loss here, and it's happened to basically every single team, except I think maybe for like Obey Alliance, but I believe almost everybody has had trouble with those angels at different points here. This combination of affixes, it's not the hardest we've ever seen. We've had Fortified Raging before, and now we just have Fortified. Storming can throw a little bit of a wrench into the plan potentially, but for the most part, it's just that Fortified Affix that they're going to try and deal with here. And this will be the make or break moment now for Perplexed. If you're a Golden Guardians fan, you're really hoping that Perplexed messes this pull up, and it is one of the hardest pulls in the dungeon. All 3 of the Angels are going to come in at the same time, and not only do they crank out an ever-increasing amount of damage on the entire group, as you can see those stacks of debuffs increasing the damage and increasing the damage taken of the entire group here, they also need to make sure they kill all 3 mobs within about 2 seconds of each other. If they fail to do that, any remaining ones are going to full heal and gain all the abilities of the killed ones. But you can see, wow, just look at the damage that Perplex is putting out here. These mobs are already sub 50%. They need to make sure they save enough bursts here for the end to make sure that they can kill whichever one is highest. That is very important, especially without that Windwalker Monk, without that Touch of Death to help equalize here. Here we can see they're all now sub 5%. They're doing a really good job here. Once the first one dies, that'll be the start of the 2-second timer here to kill all 3. Divine is under a lot of pressure, though. He still has his cheat death available. And there's the first death, and they've killed all 3. Beautiful, beautiful execution there by Perplexed. All 3 Angels dead within, they still had a second or 2 before it would have been a problem. So years in Angel time. They're starting up this Pride now, and that, I mean, Perplexed has really cleared the last big hurdle of this dungeon.
Yeah, that was incredibly well done by Perplexed as they finished off all of those 3 Angels almost exactly at the same time. Now they decided to deal with this Pride, which is something we've seen those teams skip in the past by using invisibility potions, but Perplex just deciding to play it and pulled it on top of the boss. So once the Pride reached 50%, they just decided to pull it on top of Devos, which might have something to do with the spear change, because this boss actually had a weird interaction with the achievement spears that spawned over the boss. Basically, you had your healer jump down, get the wings, pick up the spears that are spawning in the air, throw it onto Devos, which would spawn those intermission orbs to get a bigger spear that does a huge amount of damage to the boss. So by not having those, the boss actually takes quite a lot longer, and maybe that's why they decided that it's actually worth it to deal with this Pride, because you can pull it on top of the boss, just cleave it down with the boss, and then you have that Pride buff, which actually gives you quite a lot of damage. Golden Guardians, though, did manage to finish off that Angel pull as well, and you can see just how clean they're playing too on their side. But it's still just like 30% boss HP behind and 1 full Pride mob behind. So yeah, even though they are playing this cleanly, Perplexed is just playing slightly more efficient.
Yeah, this is so brutal for Golden Guardians because the run they are putting up here, I mean, it's good enough to beat almost everybody. It's good enough to probably beat many, if not most, of Perplexed or Echo's runs. It's just not good enough to beat this perfect run that we're seeing out of Perplexed. But it is an extremely strong start to the series here. Things aren't over yet, though. Perplexed does still have the last little bit of this boss to deal with. However, with Fortified being the active affix and not tyrannical, and without any serious operative affixes on this boss fight, it would be quite a throw to wipe to this boss from this position that Perplex is in. They've cleared almost all of the hard parts of this dungeon now. They really just need to make sure they're staying clean on execution here. What would be the most embarrassing would be landing or missing one of the spears out of the intermission phase. But I think they even have enough wiggle room now that even if that were to happen, they should be okay here. You can see just over the course of these incremental advantages they've built up over the dungeon, they have a 50% health lead on Devos. And I mean, it's going to be something like a minute that they win this dungeon by, which is, I mean, it seems like a lot, but it is incredible that this is a 0-death run from both teams. In Spires of Ascension of all dungeons, this is one of our least commonly 0-death dungeons. This is one of the ones where there's just, it's such a long dungeon with also so many difficult parts in it. So really impressive work here by both these teams, but it is going to be Perplexed at the end of the day with that faster run with slightly better optimization of the entire thing. That's going to take game 1 here up against Golden Guardians.
Yeah, Devos is about to go down for Perplexed as they threw that last spear. And what a clean one by Perplexed. I mean, that was just incredible to see as they're beating Golden Guardians 1-0 in the Spires.